Welcome to the Everyday Miracles podcast, where real life stories of hope and inspiration are shared. Every day, miracles are happening all around us, yet we rarely hear anything about them. Why is that? I'm Julie Hedenborg, and I've committed my time and energy to bring these stories to you, including some of my own personal experiences. My hope is that you'll be impacted the same way that I was. Join me in my journey to inspire change in a world that so desperately needs it. Hey everybody, welcome back. This is Julie, I'm your host, and today I have something extraordinary for you. This is a medical miracle that blows me away. I have a story about Micah, who was a 2-year-old boy who was internally decapitated in a car accident. And I tried to find a nicer way to say that. Unfortunately, that's exactly what it was. There's another name, atlanto-occipital dislocation. It's essentially a disconnection between the skull and the spine as supporting ligaments are torn. This leaves the spinal cord unprotected, and the slightest movement can be fatal, absolutely fatal. In the words of his surgeon, Dr. Theodore, this is one of the worst injuries that we could imagine. Good Morning America did a beautiful job sharing this miraculous testimony of healing that followed. They called it the Bionic Boy's Incredible Survival Story. It was in December of 2010. But today we have many more God pieces that we want to add. And Micah's father, John Andrews, is joining me from Scottsdale, Arizona. And he's going to share his faith journey around all of this and how God's hand was so clearly visible. Welcome, John.
Thank you. Thank you.
I know it's been 10 years. I can only imagine the memory still of that day is just indelible. Can you take us back?
Sure. Well, I mean, it was a normal day for us. Wednesday, I'll never forget. I had been at work all day, and I took my boat with me to work because I thought I'll do a little fishing. At the time, my office wasn't far from Lake Pleasant, so I thought do a little fishing. Heather usually would go to church on Wednesday nights with the kids, and she decided that night to go shopping with her friend. They put the kids always in car seats, always did things right. And things didn't go as planned. On the way home, they got hit sideways or broadside at 50 miles an hour, hit Micah and my wife's side, Heather's side. And, and you can imagine there's no car seat that protects from that. So, and I was actually coming home at the time. I left the lake a little early and I was coming home and I drove by the wreck. There were flares in the road. And I thought, oh man, wow, it must be a bad one. And I remember selfishly thinking, I hope this doesn't hold me up. It was maybe a mile from my house, and when I made the turn, as they diverted us, and then the ambulance went by me, I had no idea it was holding my family. And so I didn't get all the way home, and my phone rang. It was a fireman called me and said, hey, you need to get down to St. Joseph Hospital. Get down there as quick as you can. He said, everything's fine. They tell you that, but then right before he hung up, he said, we did everything we could do. I go, boy, those two things don't go together. What did he mean by that? I had no idea. So that marked first, I was there 16 days after that. We stayed 16 days before I really got to come home. I think I'd maybe come home to get some toothpaste and stuff like that once in the middle, but Micah was in ICU for 16 days and we stayed there every night, and Heather stayed the entire time. Heather never came home. She stayed with him the entire, I think 4 months or 4.5 months in the hospital. About 4 months, I think, something like that. It was a long time. And then, and of course, it was about a year total. We were, when we came, we had to go to the hospital twice a day for therapy for the rest of the year, so therapy. And then therapy doesn't stop. You wouldn't know if you met him, God healed him incredibly, but he's still some things to work through, so he had a ton of brain damage and he had So his injuries, I got to the hospital and saw Heather, and Heather was pretty bad. She was banged up, and she just said, "I'm fine. Elizabeth's fine. Micah's not responding. Start praying for Micah." And I thought, oh, it was awful. Micah had a lacerated liver, just, internal bleeding and a ton of brain damage, and of course, internally decapitated. And they didn't know that at the time. They didn't know that he'd had that injury yet. They'd kept him stabilized. They had his head stabilized and all that. And he was, of course, out. He wasn't conscious. He wasn't responding. And when they did everything God made sure everybody did everything just right. Even Heather jumped in the back of the car after the wreck and was just holding his head. She didn't know why. She just did. She just stabilized it. And she was just praying and praying. And when the firemen came and other people came asking if they could help before the ambulance got there, people were asking what they could do. She said, just start praying. Just start praying, because she could see that he was not responsive. And so she made sure that they knew, to keep his head straight and all of that. And they did, because one little movement, that's it. There's no more, there's nothing to stop. So essentially your head will fall. And in his surgery, when he was breathing, his skull and his spine were moving as separate entities, So a cough, that's it. They cough, sneeze, laugh, So he's just a moment away from dying. So 98.5% live or die. I'm sorry, 98.5% die from that injury, and the remaining 1.5% blow through a straw to move a wheelchair. They're the lucky ones. Those are the miracles. Usually what they throw out there. Remember, Christopher Reeves had the same injury. Remember, they talked about how fortunate was he to make it. How lucky is he? And even though he's in a wheelchair, but that injury is usually a death sentence. Nobody walks. There's a few stories out there of people walking, from it, but there's a whole lot more that get that injury that don't make it.
So at this time, once they did the tests and they realized that was the case, they weren't painting a very good picture for you, obviously.
Right. Yeah. So he was in the ICU, and they did their scans. They did all the imaging, and they'd had him stabilized, and that was one of the first things they did. And they brought Dr. Theodore in. Dr. Theodore, the world leading authority on that surgery, he developed the surgery to reattach his skull to his spine. Good Morning America did a wonderful graphic. Did you see they explained?
Yeah. Attach the link. Yeah.
Yeah, they did a great job. People should see that, with a piece of titanium like a horseshoe. And reattached his first, so it fused his first two vertebrae to his skull, and with a piece of his rib and a titanium horseshoe for strength, and there's screws, titanium screws going in it and all of that. But it leaves him, he can turn his head every which way, So pretty amazing. Well, Dr. Theodore, to his credit, he's just wonderful. He said, listen, he didn't know. They were still in the coma. And the first news was, your son is paralyzed. This injury, explained the injury to us. He had 3 doctors in charge. One was Dr. Erskine, who was in charge of his vitals. Dr. Theodore was in charge of his neck, fixing his neck. And then Dr. Eng, as a neurologist, was handling his brain injury. And very, very accomplished men. These guys are really, really good at what they do. Barrow's is one of the top hospitals in the world, and St. Joseph's. So Barrow Neurological is inside of St. Joseph, the hospital, in a hospital. St. Joseph's pediatric ICU is one of the top in the world as well.
And where is this? What city?
It's in Phoenix.
Okay.
And the pediatric ICU, since right after Micah, matter of fact, I think it was the day Micah left the ICU, the whole pediatric ICU moved over to Phoenix Children's. The whole thing was gone. Micah was, I think, one of the last patients in that pediatric ICU. So they had like the way God orchestrated this whole thing, to have the best of everybody in place, everything exactly right. But so they said, Dr. Erskine said, we're going to keep this boy alive. I've got him stabilized. We're going to keep him alive. He's not going to get any more brain damage. We're hoping, we're going to do all we can to lessen those effects. And Dr. Theodore said, I'm going to fix his neck. He said clearly, I'll never forget. He said, I'll operate on him as if he's my own child. And I really do feel that. I mean, he's a really caring, solid Christian guy. And it settled us a lot, but he said, hey, he's paralyzed. And Dr. Eng, of course, he had really bad news for us. And that Micah had extensive brain damage, that he wasn't going to be aware enough to blow through the straw and move a wheelchair. And that we may consider not continuing care. And medically, I mean, he was, you couldn't argue with him. But clearly, I can tell you, it's not, we talked about this, not a great act of faith. My wife and I are believers, and we were there then and before then. But God gave this to us. I mean, I just knew what they were telling me just wouldn't sink in. It just didn't fit. I just knew he was going to walk. He was going to be fine. It wasn't like I stepped out in faith and claimed it. That's not the case. It wasn't a great act of faith. It was nothing in me at all. It was a gift. And like I said, I mean, the only way to explain it is God just is telling me, you're too dumb for this. You can't handle it. I'll put this in your head, and you just think that. And I mean, it was a gift, And when they tell me these things, it just didn't add up. It doesn't sound right, It just wouldn't stick. So there was a touch and go. I mean, for a long time, he's 16 days in the ICU, and they took him in. And did the surgery on his neck while he was still in a coma. Day 12, I think it was, or day 10 maybe. They did the surgery on his neck and repaired his neck, and then they just have it they had him in a halo until then. And as soon as they did the surgery on his neck, the halo came off, and then just had him in a neck brace, and that's all. He said, oh yeah, the way they fixed it, it's a legit fix, But again, we need to talk about seating arrangements, right? They would the customized wheelchair and all of that, and they said, we got his neck fixed. He's not going to die. He's not going to get jostled and his neck and head flop over and kill him. He'll live a long life in that wheelchair, And of course, they usually don't. Without that surgery, it's a pretty short life because they're just a mishap away from not making it, because they can't hold their head up. The muscles are no longer attached. So he told us, he's paralyzed. They're still telling us, and they're still wanting to meet with us about the wheelchairs. And I just said, I don't think we're going to need it. Let's just not go there. He hasn't woken up yet. We haven't seen him. We'll talk about that later, and it just didn't fit. Why would we do that? I thought. And anyhow, long story. I guess there's several things through there that were just, that time in the ICU was brutal, brutal and amazing at the same time, and 16 days of watching the numbers, his brain pressure. He had to have a shunt relieve the pressure in his head, and he watched the pressure numbers in his head. And it was like being, Peter, when everything was good and you're relying on God, they don't bother you, but you start watching the numbers like Peter seeing the waves around him and sink. We would sink, and holy smokes, I would, just start to falter and just fall apart. And, it was tough. But God did so many things through it to just remind us that I got this. He's sovereign. It was just pictures of his sovereignty and that he was in control, that you just couldn't argue with. And when I say it wasn't a great act of faith of mine, it really wasn't that we got it, because he did so many things in this that would show us, and just strength affirming events. So I'll tell you this one, you and I talked about this. When he was still in his coma, I don't remember which day it was, Dr. Eng came to see us. He's a neurologist, to, give us more bad news. It seemed, he's doing his job, and he really knows what he's talking about. So he came to show us the brain scans. And so kids that he explained, kids that have 2 or 3 of these little spots on the scan, that's the damage. They may never walk or talk again. He said, you can't count them. His whole brain was like shaking up a jar of jelly, all the shear damage. So it just sheared everything. And he said, it's not good, But my father-in-law was with us, and my father-in-law, Craig, was a church planter for the Southern Baptist Convention in Slovakia. He was a pastor and missionary, and he would start churches. But he was in Slovakia for quite a while, over 10 years. And this had been some time ago. So when he was first there, he planted a church. I think he was in Bratislava, is where they planted a church. He was in Bratislava a lot, and some other little towns. I probably will butcher the name and not pronounce them right. But so we were sitting there, and Dr. Eng always had several residents with him. He's had residents in tow, and he came to deliver the bad news. And we were just, up to this point, I am falling, I'm up and down and just really struggling, and praying. And we hear it all the time that God's in control, and whatever he says, and whatever he does in our life is perfect for us, right? And that, and you can say it. And I knew it. I'd heard it a million times in a million sermons, but I couldn't. I knew it, but I couldn't say it. For some reason, I thought if I prayed and said, God, whatever you do with my son is your choice, and it's right for me, and it's right for Micah, and it's right for everybody, because it's your will, and whatever is your will is perfect. I thought if I said that, for some reason, I just couldn't say it, because I thought he'd take him, as if I had some inkling of control or say in the matter,
Yeah.
And sitting there. So Eng came in with all of the residents in tow, and my father-in-law was with us, and my wife, and my father-in-law made eye contact with one of the residents, and he kind of looked, he said, Alex. And Alex said, Craig, here's this resident who's a doctor from Slovakia, who years back was a kid in a youth group of the church my father-in-law planted in this small Slovak village. Slovak kid. And Slovakia is not a wealthy country. It's not a lot of Slovaks make it to America unless they play hockey or something. But this is an uncommon event. The chances of these two reuniting on the other side of the world, right? And the one presence, one believer on that team, instantly we all knew, I still get goosebumps. We all knew, like, God is in such control. He orchestrated these lives to this moment. That was when I got it. It was like, that was such a smack in the face. God is sovereign, and his ways are definitely beyond ours, way beyond, and just trust he's in control. Alex would pray with us, he'd come and deliver the news, but he could sit and he'd pray for Micah, and it was just it was awesome, incredible to see them, that reunion, and we all knew. My father-in-law turned to us, he was like, you ever doubted God's in control? After we had that talk with Alex, oh my goodness,
Such confirmation.
Oh, it was like, and after that, I don't know if Micah was making incredible gains in numbers. I just probably didn't see it, because I was so worried about everything going on, watching the numbers, watching the waves and falling apart. But after that, we started to see these changes in the right direction,
Yeah.
And it was just that was the changing moment. I was able to pray and just tell God, like, I know you're in control. I mean, whatever you choose to do is right for me, right for Micah. He's yours, you know, your will, Lord, just do it, you know. And he was going to anyways, but for me, I needed to say it. I needed to be there. And wow, a peace, he gave me such a peace about it, you know, whatever happened, you know. And it's a difficult thing, difficult place to get, you know, to. But anyhow, it was so many things. So we're at he was 16 days in the ICU and 12 days in the coma. So day 12, they said, let's wake him up. We're going to see what we can do. He's already had his surgery, stabilized, numbers have stabilized, all of that. So let's wake him up. And so he was only up for about a minute. But beforehand, they'd prepared us. Dr. Eng had told us that you're not going to see what you expect. You know, your son's, ugly word, vegetable, right? And it's a shocking word when it's your little child, your 2-year-old. And we're like, and they said, but he's not going to move. He's paralyzed, you know, preparing us just to wake him up, wake up this shell of a child, you know. So we're like just praying and praying and praying. And they gave him some medication to start to bring him out. And it took a while. And then they were talking to him, you know, Micah. And we knew he could hear us when he was in his coma because we had to be careful not talk. If we would start to talk to him, his pressure would go up in his brain, you know. And so you want to hear it. You want him to hear you. You know what I mean? But then it get the pressures, dangerous numbers if you didn't. It was brutal. Anyhow, so they started to wake him up, and he comes around, he opens his eyes, and it was the most amazing moment and the most heartbreaking moment at the same time, because he started to growl and slobber, and it wasn't him. And but at the same time, he pulled up his arms and legs, and I said, we're bawling, but then we're ecstatic, like, he's not paralyzed. I told you, you know, I mean, instantly, we're like, God said it, you know, we knew, it just absolutely knew it was going to happen. He pulls his arms and legs up, but he's growling, you know. It was brutal. Everybody was there. There was shift change. So 2 shifts of doctors in the ER and nurses, and everyone was there. And the nurses, I mean, the nurses were amazing. There's a nurse that my wife still keeps in contact with. She came in when my wife was at a particularly low point, and the nurse came in, and she'd been super professional to that point, you know, and really good at what she does. And she came in and just threw it all aside. She said, come here. Took my wife aside and prayed like heaven down on earth on her. The woman, that woman can pray. She was like, it was like the most incredibly powerful prayer my wife had ever heard. And, you know, and we had no idea, you know what I mean? She just put it all aside. She said, you and me right here, and let her have it. Just, it was the timing, and it was right. That was, I think, the day before they woke him up, you know, and my wife needed that, you know, the most, and just the support from God just kept people in our lives. When we get hungry, food would walk in the door, right? When we get hungry, we'd imagine someone would come walk in the door with the food, and it would be as ridiculous as we had another person come visit us, and they'd be in there with us, and they would bring 3 burgers instead of 2. They said, they gave me an extra one, you know, and we'd have food for them. It was just so complete. God's provision was so complete for us. It was every step of the way. It was just, he was just there, constantly reminding, because I guess he had to, because we're thick-headed, you know. And
yeah.
So he's like, just keep watching me. Just keep watching me. Keep watching me. Don't look at the waves. Don't pay attention. Don't listen to what they say. I'm telling you he's going to walk. I'm telling you he's going to be fine. Just watch me. And it was constant reminders. You know, he kept getting our attention and getting our attention, reminding us, watch me, watch me. And he does that for us, you know. He doesn't do things obscurely, you know.
Mm-hmm.
When God makes it known when he's doing something, it's not a secret, you know. That
Mm-hmm.
whole thing about, I think I told you this, somebody walked down and they were telling us about our situation, remind them of that famous picture with, you know, the footprints in the sand where there's only one set of footprints. I was like, that thing is so wrong. It should look like this, where they're dragging you across the sand. That's just like you're just being drug along, and you have no choice. You know, you're being drug along, and like they always say that God will never give me more than I can handle, and that is not true. That is not true. I wish people have that off. He often will. He definitely gives you more than you can handle because he wants to handle it for you. He wants you to rely on him, right? All through scripture, all of these impossible situations, those were all more than people could handle themselves. And God's repeatedly trying to tell you and trying to show them, you need me, you need me, you need me. I'm the one that does this, right? Not you. Paul tells us he has to increase while I decrease, right? All of these things. He will absolutely give you more than you can handle. Promise you. And you just have to lean on him and let him drag you. Because that's what it's like. And that's what he did for us. We just, it was nothing that we accomplished ourselves. There was no great act of faith in it for us. It was all him saying, just keep watching me, keep coming, you know? And so he doesn't, he comes out, it was up for a minute, right? We're elated that he's not paralyzed, you know? And I tell him, you know, keep your stupid wheelchair. We don't need it. And the next day they said, you know, we're still broken a little bit, quite a bit over seeing what we saw. And they said, yeah, they started to prepare us. He's in a neurological state of frustration. It could be a very long time until he's out of that. I mean, some people stay in it for years, you know, where they're not themselves. And we're like, oh man, you know, praying and praying and praying. Next day they said, we're going to try it again. So he was up for 1 minute the day before. We're going to get this kid up again and see if we can keep him up. So they go at it again, trying to get his attention, and he starts same thing, you know, the same thing. Pulls his arms and legs up and started the growling and the slobbering. It's super hard to talk about that part because it just wasn't him. He was so full of life, happy little kid, you know.
Yeah.
He had this funny little thing that he would do with you know, typical little boy, 2.5 years old. He'd run up to his sister and like if he wasn't wearing anything but a diaper, he'd put the diaper on her and he'd say diaper and she'd ew, you know, little kids being ridiculous.
Yeah.
He did it all the time though. You know, it's like he'd get her, but she wasn't paying attention. He'd go put his bottom on her and he'd say diaper. And so when he was growling, I'm praying, I'm like, oh, we're, you know, losing it. I'm like, this is horrible. God, I can't do this. You got to do something. And I bent down in his ear and I said, Micah, diaper, diaper. And it just said, and he stopped and the biggest grin, huge, big smile. And man, I'm not going to cry on your shit.
It's okay.
Oh, man. Everybody was just stopped. And they were just, everybody started crying, hugging the nurses and doctors. I mean, they were amazing. Never, ever went back. Never, ever did it again. You know, we had him back. That one we knew he had a lot to overcome, but we knew he had his memories. He remembered that.
Yeah.
We got our little guy coming back.
He was in there. Yeah.
There. And he's super aware. You don't react to a joke that you shared at 2.5 years old. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And as a vegetable, you know, and so it was a lot of stuff. He had to learn everything, to walk, to talk. His eyes were set to the left; they wouldn't go forward. And then you'd say something, just pray and pray and pray. Just kept praying. We'd pray for small things, you know, little victories. We'd pray for him to say an M. We'd pray that he'd be able to swallow. We'd pray that his eyes would just come forward once. And they did. he'd say something, his eyes went boom, and then back. But the fact they came forward was like, oh, they'll stay forward eventually. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It was just about trying to get his attention, the therapies and stuff, and then they straightened out. You know, just one thing would happen completely, and it was so strange. He'd have a little victory where he wasn't really responding very well on one side of his body. He wasn't using it. But my wife sat there one day just rubbing really hard that body and praying for him, just praying and praying, just kept rubbing him, praying really hard. Because they when they wrote down his therapies, what to focus on, they weren't even going to bother with that. You know, they were just focusing on some certain things that they thought were most important, and that they just kind of said that let's not worry about that right now, that left side. And so Heather sat there when she heard that, read the chart or whatever, she just kept rubbing him and praying over that side. And next morning, when he woke up, he's using his arm. You know, that left side's operating. But everything would improve, and there'd be one little improvement. It affected all kinds of stuff. Like one little connection would get made, but it would improve several different things, you know. Mm-hmm. And but God put so many people in our lives. He just kept sending people to us. And Natani is a good friend of ours who came down early on to intervene about the therapy. She'd had her son suffered a traumatic brain injury, and he's a lot worse off than Micah. He's still, you know, to this day, he's, you know, kind of in a childlike state, you know, and as a teenager, I think nearly an adult now, but amazing. She was just sitting there. She didn't know us. She'd heard our story and felt compelled to come down to the hospital and wait on us. And she waited in the lobby and waited for us to go into the neuro rehab. And she thought she'd catch us coming out. And she sat there patiently and waited for us. And then just like, she said, look, you don't know me. Can I have a minute of your time? My name's Natani. And she just laid it out for us. What was so important for us to do right now, these early stages, what's most important for Micah. Please be careful with certain things to watch out for, things that we really needed to introduce to him because she had made mistakes, you know. And we had no idea, you know what I mean? We're just, this is the first time this happened to us, you know, and God through this whole thing. But we realized, like, you know, just trust it, just let it go. She was more food walking in the door, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's another person God put in our path, and just, you know, clearly. And so there was therapies that Micah got from the stuff that she got us involved with that were just super key. You know, it couldn't have been better timed. All the things, everything was just right. And of course, Barrow's did a lot too. You know what I mean? Barrow Neurological is wonderful, and they did a lot of stuff to help him. Bob Doman with National Association of Child Development, NACD, is a wonderful man. The therapies that he did before and we left the hospital, while he was still in the, you know, going to outpatient therapy, we were doing stuff with Doman as well. And he's amazing. He's amazing. The stuff that he assesses children individually and then writes therapies for them specifically so the parents can do them at home, because they don't get just a half-hour session a day, or it's not enough, you know. It's just not enough. He knows that, and unfortunately some places aren't giving them the things they need, you know. But he's a really neat guy, and I try to push people with brain injuries towards them. He's just amazing. So we really started seeing the incredible gains and with everything with Micah when we started to implement the stuff from Doman. But anyhow, it was just God had so many lessons for us. There were so many things along the way, just so many people, and it left no doubt. He just, I'm so grateful that he didn't leave doubt for us, because I would have failed, absolutely failed. And you know, the danger in that is if you're not, I always say that really good advice, really bad advice comes in wonderful packages, right? In the form of a world leading expert, you know. nothing against that one of his doctors, but his professional opinion was to discontinue care. It's maybe the most loving thing you can do. And brilliant man, super well accomplished, he knows what he's talking about, medically. And if we hadn't been, if God wasn't, I hesitate to say we hadn't been listening to the Lord. I'm not sure we had a choice because he kept slapping us in the face with it. He was really involved. But had we not listened to him, we thought we're being good parents by turning it off. And it's you get bad advice, from people like Job did. He got really bad advice from his 3 friends, right? That came to him, and when he was in the pit, and they all gave him horrible advice, and it was wrapped in scripture, manipulated, right? It was godly advice. It was, these were men who were advising him on his sin, and they were giving him horrible advice. And they were individuals he trusted, right?
Yeah.
And they knew what they were talking about, right?
Yeah.
They gave him the exact opposite advice of what God wanted him to do.
Well, how did Dr. Eng react when Micah makes this miraculous turnaround? I mean, Micah ends up walking, and there were lots of things that he had to work on improving in therapies, but this was completely, nobody saw this coming. So what was his response to all that?
I never had the opportunity to sit down and talk with him about it. He's a really busy man, but I know he was shocked when, and I'm sure he was super happy for us. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And all of that. He's really, really good at what he does. But Heather had met him on the bridge going across 3rd Avenue or 3rd Street down at the hospital. The hospital encompasses a big area, and there's buildings on each side of the street, and there's a big walkway in between. It's climate controlled, it's just, and she was up on the bridge walking across with Micah going to neuro rehab, and Eng met them in the middle on this bridge. It's about a block. It's pretty good size, pretty wide, with his residents in tow, and they were the only ones on it, and they met right in the middle. And he was just shocked, speechless. He was like, "This Micah?" He couldn't believe it. And Micah stuck out his little hand. This is like, I think it had been about 5 or 6 months. He stuck out his little hand to shake his hand. He said, "I'm Micah Andrews."
Oh.
And shake his hand, and Eng was shocked, and he didn't know what to say. He just did not know what to say. He was kind of speechless, and it was kind of an awkward moment where he turned to one of his residents, and he asked if "You go to church, don't you?" He'd say, and he'd say, "You can talk to her." He didn't. It was just he didn't know what to address, and my wife didn't. She just said, "Here's Micah. He's doing wonderful. God, God's good." That's all she said. She didn't, he did not know what to do with it,
That had to be a huge impact on him.
I hope so, yeah. But he's smart man, very, very brilliant, very accomplished, and he made sure, Micah didn't have any more brain injury. He did his job. He really took care of him.
Yeah.
He did a wonderful job.
Yeah.
And,
can you share too what Dr. Theodore said? I really loved what you shared with me. That he said, "I may have done the surgery on Micah.
I fixed Micah's neck, but God's the one that healed him," he said.
Yes.
He said, "I didn't work a miracle. I don't do that. That's God's department." And
I love that.
And he still will say that, We call Dr. Theodore every year, Micah's birthday, just thank him, But he's an amazing guy, He's an amazing guy. He's now I believe, the director of spinal surgery for Johns Hopkins University. So he's like the top spinal surgeon for the #1 hospital in the world.
Amazing. And he also quoted something in the interview that I loved. He said, "Miracles happen every day." Jumping up and down. It was like, yes, they do. Yes, they do.
Yeah. He's a great guy. Yeah, there was so many things. I mean, things come to me all. We'll still. What Heather and I were talking about when we were talking about doing this podcast. I wish she could have been with me today on this, but we were talking about it and just going back through it, and we still remember things, or we'll still fit other pieces together that we didn't see before. You know, how can you know how God orchestrated these events and people's lives, you know, that cross paths when, you know, what are the chances was like the, you know, what are the chances of this and what are the chance? Of course, it's not chance. There's no chance in it at all. Mm-hmm. You know, God had this all laid out way in advance, you know.
Yeah.
And it's just humbling and really faith building and affirming to look back on it for us and see all the incredible things he did through this, you know, and just how amazing and loving he is, and how it's a reminder of how involved he is in our lives, you know, how important it is to him that we follow him, you know, and that we get that he's involved. He's not the distant clockmaker, that he is. When I say call me Father, I mean it, you know.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And you said Heather was just amazing. I mean, just so committed and on top of every single detail. She's just been.
She's a rock.
I do want to talk to her at some point.
Oh yeah, no, I'd love for you to do that. Yeah, they couldn't. She was a rock. She never left the hospital in all that time. It was months, you know, months. And we have a daughter, Elizabeth. Elizabeth's a couple years older than Micah, and she was staying with grandma, and she would come down to the hospital. And then I went home after day 16, and I slept at home, and I would come to the hospital every day because I started to keep things going at home. And then Elizabeth stayed with grandma and grandpa for 3 or 4 weeks, and then she came home with me. And then we would go to the hospital every day, spend the day there, see Micah, and then come out. You know, we didn't let Elizabeth see him in the ICU. She's 4, you know, a little bit too early. Those images are tough. You know, yeah. I think parents need to be careful about what they expose their kids to, you know. Mm-hmm. And it was really, really, she saw, as a matter of fact, a couple of years later, she saw an image of him while he was in his coma that someone, some news channel flashed on the television. And she had no idea. She didn't see him like that. And she just fell apart, you know. It was really hard. They tried it, you know, the hospitals do their best. They had a bear that they tried to prepare us with. This bear had all the tubes coming out of it and talking to us about preparing Elizabeth to see him. And I said, I just put mutilated bear away. We're going to wait till he's out of the ICU. And we're not going to, I don't even know what that bear will do to her. You know, yeah. He's going to be fine. I just kept saying, he was in his coma. He's going to be fine. She's going to see him. He's going to be fine. God was telling us, no. There'll be plenty of time for her to see him. It's okay, you know. And sure enough, it was way easier on Elizabeth, you know, and better for everybody. And, you know.
Yeah. And Micah, I obviously want to hear all about how Micah's doing now, how old
he's on fire. You know, he's doing great. He's on his age level with school, you know, and he's just he's such a good kid. He's just a happy, you know, he's huge. He's getting bigger and bigger. He's going to be big. He's going to be a big boy, but he just had his 12th birthday, you know, and he likes to shoot hoops, you know. We still have some challenges, you know, some things with his eyesight, you know, that's still improving, you know, things are getting better and better. And we've got him in a sort of a visual therapy. He goes once a week for that. And then Heather, my wife, every day you'll see her spending time doing his therapy for his vision. His eyes were not tracking, like reading's really difficult. If one eye seeing one image and another eye seeing another, and they're not putting them together in his brain. We didn't know that. We had no idea until he started to read. And when he started to read, he just struggled. He would stare at it and stare at it. And or you'd have a bunch of items on the table. You'd say, hand me my keys. And he would stare at it. He couldn't pick the keys out. He would just stare at it like, what in the world? But if it was just one thing, he'd right for it. And we couldn't pin it. So finally, you know, sometimes because it's normal to him, you know, it'd
Yeah.
been that way for so long. He doesn't know how to tell us if, you know, that he's seeing double images, you know, his brain's not processing it right. So nothing wrong physically with his eyes. They're not moving independently.
Yeah.
You know, but the images aren't as one in his brain. They're sending two separate images.
Yeah.
So
walking and talking, and he's
running, jumping, playing, turning his head, playing basketball, you know, happy, such a good, happy kid. Loves the Lord. I mean, he's solid. He's such a good kid, you know, never, ever. I don't know if he's ever been in trouble, you know, and, you know, we're parents. We believe, you know, in discipline your kids biblically and all that. But this kid he just does it. He's the easiest child in the world. If we'd have had him first, we might not have had any more children. I don't know. But he's God. I mean, if you tell him to do something one day, he will do it from that day forward. You won't tell him again and again and again and again. Of course, he's not a teenager yet, so that could change. But he was like this when he was before the wreck. Little guy, you'd say, Micah, don't just drop your little toys there. You need to put them away when you're done. Yes, sir, Daddy. And he that day forward, he would, if he dropped his toys and he was done playing them, he would put them away. You know, it's just a gem. So he's a happy little guy. He's not so little anymore, but he's getting big. But
now, is he going to have additional surgery as he grows taller? Or
it'll be fine. It's supposed to grow with him, because that's why they introduced part of the rib, so the rib will continue to grow with his bone.
Wow, that is phenomenal. And I encourage people, don't be squeamish. These pictures of the surgery are all computer generated. There's nothing gory or anything like that. It's really phenomenal. It's phenomenal. I didn't even know they did that.
Yeah, it's an amazing surgery. He gets so no contact sports for Micah, none of that, because it's a good fix, but it's not how God put it together, you know. And so no contact sports, no wrestling. We've had to he's a boy, you know what I mean? At church, little boys, they're rowdy, you know. So we've had to really watch it and get on him or other kids, you know, a few times and let them know not Micah. Unfortunate, that kind of heartbreaking, because little boys like to tumble around and rough one another up. That's part of being a little boy, you know.
Yeah.
But you just can't do that, you know. So none of that stuff, no contact sports, but otherwise normal life, you know.
It's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Absolutely phenomenal. I'm so pleased. I'm so grateful to you for sharing this with us today. You've shared so much just about your faith. Do you have any other parting message for people that are struggling or questioning God?
Yeah. That's always I think the toughest thing to get when you're going through something like that. And people ask us to come talk about this to them when their child was coming through it, get cancer. This happened. Someone asked me to come talk to him. And I got there and there's 30 people in his house, you know. I'm like, oh man. And I think they were expecting me to come in and say, God's in the healing business, which he is, right? Mm-hmm. He can do anything he wants. And he's absolutely a healer. He healed my son. But it doesn't mean he's going to. He healed mine. And I think they're expecting me to maybe come in and tell them that, yeah, he healed my son. He'll heal yours. And just have faith and he'll heal him. That's not the case. I don't think that's the message. People, that gets preached out there a lot with prosperity preachers saying, if you do this, God has to do that. He absolutely is sovereign. That means he doesn't have to do anything he wanted to do. But he absolutely loves us, right? So, but he knows what's best for us. And that's not always what we think is best for us. And you have to understand that. Coming to terms with God's sovereignty and knowing that he loves us and whatever he chooses for us is the best. And we might not know it. It might really hurt, but it was the best thing for you. And it was his will is perfect. And if you come to terms with that, then you'll have peace through it and you'll grow and you won't fall apart. and just understanding His sovereignty and whatever God chooses to do, to truly be okay with it. Then you'll have joy through it. It's a strange thing to have joy. I just watched my son have a seizure on a table while he's in a coma. You know, to have pain and joy at the same time is a really, really weird thing, but it is certainly possible only as a gift from God. But you won't experience that peace and joy until you come to terms, I think, with His sovereignty, you know, and in a not cold way. I mean, He is a loving God. You know, He wants you to understand that He is in control, and whatever is good. We're kids. We think of Him as our Father, and we're His children, but we think we're so smart, and we think we're so advanced, and we think just because we want it, He should want to do it because it's clearly the right choice, because we know so much. And your children know absolutely that they could absolutely live off of chocolate, right?
Yes.
We can take that, we can give them every now and some. We don't let them live off it. We take that chocolate away from them, and they will kick and scream and cry, and they're heartbroken. They're devastated because they know they need it. They need it, right? They know that. They're so limited in that they think they need that popsicle right now or that sucker. And it's devastating into the world when you take a sucker from a 3-year-old and say, you don't need that. We know they don't need it, right? We're making the best choice for them because we love them, but it feels like, but we're making a sovereign choice, right?
Yes.
And but for that kid, it's devastating. But you know, they can't handle that choice, and eventually they'll be better for it and healthier and all of that. So it's the same thing. God makes these choices that we feel, why would you do that? I needed that sucker. You know, I needed that. And can't you see, that was the center of my world. I needed it so bad. But he's so much more than we are and understands things so far, you know, so much more than we do. The choices He makes for us are right. We just have to learn to trust them. And you have to realize that compared to Him, we're just a 3-year-old with a sucker, you know?
Yeah.
That's,
I love that.
yeah.
Awesome. Thank you so much. This has been amazing.
It's not the it's not the feel good, I guess, touchy feely, God's going to do everything you tell Him to do answer, but it's the truth. I think that's what Scripture teaches. Is, you know, He's sovereign, and whatever He chooses for you is the best. You know, and you have to come to terms with that. And He's not a cosmic vending machine. You know, He doesn't owe you His obedience. You know. Yeah.
Well, I am just so thrilled that Micah's doing well and that we got to share this today, and the amazing ways that he worked through. It's amazing that intern from around the world came back into your life, just in all the people that came in, just to confirm that God was with you through all of it. And the knowing that you had, it doesn't sound like it was a denial. It doesn't sound like it was a hope. It was a knowing that He gave you. That's just beautiful.
Yeah, it was. It was a protection for us.
Yeah.
Really. He's like, you screw this up if I don't tell you. You know? So.
Oh, well, John, thank you so much for today. It's been amazing. Please check out the link below for the story from Good Morning America. It has pictures of Micah and his family and Heather and the physicians. Dr. Theodore is in there. It's a beautiful story that they did. Also, the importance of a car seat, they talk about that. And as a nurse, I feel compelled to say, if there's anyone that you know that has possibly had a neck injury, it's so critical to not move that patient. Obviously, if they're in imminent danger and there's fire or something, you need to just keep that spine immobilized as much as possible until you can get some help.
Yeah.
I felt compelled to say that.
Even if you think you shouldn't, even if you don't understand why.
Yeah, you know? Just keep it immobilized until someone can come and help you. Oh, we praise God for this miracle today. And please check out the blog, like I said, in the link, and for more stories and pictures. And if you have a miracle that you would like to share with me, please reach out to me at everydaymiraclespodcast@gmail.com. God bless you.